We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse's Phil Brasher, as well as this week by Illinois Republican Rodney Davis. And Congressman Davis, we appreciate you joining us.
Hey, great to be on with both of you.
So I'm sure a lot of our viewers are very familiar with you and your work based on your time on the House Agriculture Committee. What a lot of them might not know is that you're also the ranking member on the House Administration Committee, which is, with all due respect to the panel's work, I'm guessing people that don't work in the inner throngs of Congress might not be too horribly familiar with it. But in your capacity in that role, you've had kind of an elevated position here these last couple of weeks as we dealt with the electoral vote counts, the impeachment trial, and as well as some discussion about some metal detectors outside the House of Representatives here this week. Wondering, kind of all of that in mind, all of the events of the last couple of weeks in mind, when we came out of the election, we heard that we were going to have this narrow margin between Republicans and Democrats in Congress. It was going to lead to this mandate for bipartisanship and cooperation. What is the events of the last 2 weeks done to that supposed spirit of cooperation that we were going to be looking to see between Republicans and Democrats in the House?
Well, I hope it hadn't done long-term damage. Really, I think President Biden missed a golden opportunity to call on the country to heal. Instead, he sat back silently as the House decided to impeach the president in a very rushed manner. Conversely, the Electoral College vote was something I never thought I would experience as a member of Congress. I was on a baseball field the day that a crazed gunman who was inspired by violent rhetoric and devastating rhetoric from the left came to try and kill me and my friends while screaming healthcare at us. What we also saw was the damage of rhetoric and misinformation on the right, that somehow we were going to be able to change the election outcome for president based upon the Electoral College certification. That was never going to happen. We fulfilled our constitutional duty to count the electoral votes that each state sent to Washington, D.C. But at the same time, the Democrats have now created this misinformation that somehow the president's going to be removed from office via impeachment. It's not going to happen. And he's going to be out of office because he lost the election. That's the danger. And unfortunately, what that misinformation does is it puts everybody in their partisan corners. And even in a small majority, if everybody thinks party first rather than policy, then it controls what Speaker Pelosi puts on the floor and frankly gives the speaker more power.
Congressman, what is the situation now within the House Republican Conference? Presumably you all would be pretty united. You've had some difficult, not only in the House, but in the Senate as well. You've had a difficult couple of weeks. You had 10 members vote for impeaching the president for a second time, and led by your conference chair, Lynn Cheney, some calls for her to be removed from that post. What's the situation? How divided are you?
Well, I would urge every one of my colleagues, take a step back. Let's realize that we are all in different districts. I represent a lot different district than many of my colleagues do, and I vote differently. So if we're going to create an internal Republican fratricide movement every time somebody disagrees with another Republican, then we're never going to be able to focus on the job at hand. And that's erasing our small minority and turning it into the majority. I would constantly remind my colleagues, if you don't like the way the House is being run by Nancy Pelosi, if you don't like some of the decisions that she implements unilaterally, the only way to fix that is to take the majority. This is a majority-driven institution. If you don't like the schedule, take the majority, we'll set the schedule. If you don't like the bills we're voting on, take the majority. Let's decide what bills we vote on. If you don't like what's being put in place when it comes to running the Capitol, give us the majority. And then I'll take control of what is done in the Capitol through the House Administration Committee. But right now, we can't let that be a distraction. We've got to make sure that that Capitol complex is safe and secure for the inauguration on January 20th. We did not know, I know our Capitol Police and our Sergeant at Arms, they did not know they needed to be in a much more secure posture, because I was briefed on January 5th. They anticipated First Amendment protests and did not know violence was coming. What is really frustrating to me is we subsequently found out through the Washington Post writing about it that an FBI field office in Norfolk, Virginia knew that there was intelligence that this could be violent. And it was never relayed to the Capitol Police Chief, who's no longer there. It was never relayed to the Sergeant at Arms. So it's our job to make sure that that doesn't ever happen again. That's been my task this week, to embed our folks with the FBI and with other intelligence agencies to make sure that this goes off without what we saw last week, which was an attack on our government, unfortunately, by Americans.
This obviously, we're getting in the final days of President Trump's presidency. How do you, what do you see the biggest impact he's had on the party, and what kind of influence do you think he's going to have on the base and on members of Republican members of Congress over the next few years?
I think that depends on how vocal he decides to be. But any ex-president loses their ability to influence a certain segment of society. They become ex-presidents. I mean, it's the same question that many asked when President Obama was leaving office and we were moving into the Trump administration. How much of an influence was he going to have? Did he do enough to help Hillary Clinton win the election? All those questions. I love the Monday morning quarterbacking when it comes to politics, but hey, elections matter, and there are winners and there are losers. And the narrative of our national policy agenda will change based upon who sits in the executive branch. And it's going to be Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So we have to change our strategy of how we get things done. And the good news is, when it comes to agriculture and ag policy, that has, for the most part, since I've been in Washington, been one of the most bipartisan places we could be. I certainly am optimistic with Chairman Scott and working with our ranking member, G.T. Thompson, that we can take a step back, realize that we've got to be able to agree on some policy agenda, on a policy agenda. And that's what's crucial, especially since we've seen some of the things come out of the Trump administration in its waning days.
Joe Biden just came out with a $1.9 trillion COVID relief plan. This is going to be his top priority, congressional Democrats' top priority come next week. Is there anything how much of that do you think Republicans can support? And there's nothing in here with regard to additional agriculture assistance. Do you think there needs to be?
Absolutely. You can't have a COVID relief bill without ensuring that we get food and nutrition to those who need it the most, ensure that we have a viable agricultural sector that has the potential to be decimated by a lack of a marketplace to be able to sell our goods and services out into that global marketplace. I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised. I mean, look, there's a distinct philosophical difference between Republicans and Democrats. I'm not surprised that an incoming Democratic administration that's going to have a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, albeit by the closest of close margins, they're going to talk about spending more money. I've met many Democrats that I serve with that have yet to actually see a tax dollar that you and your viewers have yet to earn that they don't want to take and spend. Now, we spent a lot of money because of the pandemic. I saw people vote for trillion-dollar packages that I've never seen vote for an annual appropriations bill. But that was because it was needed. The government told the economy and our businesses to shut down. We helped keep the economy alive. Now, the first effort of a Democratic administration ought to be to say, how can we come up with a bipartisan solution like we did at the beginning of this pandemic? But instead, they decide to impeach the president, where he's never going to be removed from office via impeachment. It destroys the Constitution by politicizing what that impeachment clause means. And frankly, it leads to more partisanship, which is not going to prove well for the ag sector.
Just to follow up there, you just enacted a bill in December that included $13 billion additional funding for agriculture. Most of that hasn't been distributed yet. We will be in the next few months. What additional do you think needs to be done beyond that, especially in light of what's happened in so many of these commodity markets with prices up substantially over what they were a year ago?
Yeah, the answer everyone should give to that question is, why don't we wait to see what the 13 billion does? But instead, typical Washington Democrats, it's more, 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 more. And in a very small majority that they have, they're likely to get none, 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 none.
So, Congressman, as is typical in the waning days of any presidential administration, we're seeing the Trump administration, work to finalize a number of things that it was working on. One of the things that we didn't see this week, however, was new small refinery exemptions from the renewable fuel standard. There are reports that those could potentially emerge here this week. We've seen some other activity in relation to biofuels policy in the RFS here today. But as we sit here right now, no new announced SREs. But as we zoom out on that and kind of look at the broader subject of biofuel policy, a lot of groups were very excited when the Trump administration was elected because they thought they had a president that was very supportive of their industry. A lot of those groups are now similarly saying that they're excited for the Biden administration to come in because there won't be the same level of concern about SREs. From your chair where you sit in the House, what do you think it should be the expectation in terms of biofuel policy and where we go from here in kind of these early years of the Biden administration?
Well, first off, President Trump overwhelmingly won the areas of our agricultural sector all throughout middle America and throughout rural America. He won by exponential margins. So they forgave him for some of the initial missteps in his administration, and especially being the small refinery exemptions. And I'm optimistic that the tug of war between Secretary Perdue and USDA and the EPA and Administrator Wheeler that we've been involved in as the Biofuels Caucus that I helped chair has caused that tension not to move in the direction of the SREs. I'm certainly hoping that as the administration changes, that we don't see a victory for those small refinery exemptions. And 22 of my colleagues and we signed a letter to the administration asking them not to do that. However, I don't know what's going to happen. And we haven't been told that there's been a decision made either way. The good news is there's also information in the Federal Register released that is going to allow for E15. The promise that the Trump administration made for year-round E15 and a possible change to labeling requirements is a huge benefit to our farmers in the Midwest, especially.
So it's been a busy day as part of a busy week, as part of what's turning out to be a very busy month. We could probably sit here and chat with you, Congressman, for quite a bit longer. But out of respect for your time and out of respect for our viewers' sanity, we'll keep things condensed to just this at this point. But Congressman Davis, appreciate you joining us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys ending the call talking about sanity. So smart. You don't let members of Congress and reporters talk too long on interviews. That's great.
On behalf of Congressman Davis and Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.